state. I will not live in a fascist state.
Well, here we are. Donald Trump is acting like a little fucking baby. At least I think so. Donald Trump is trying his damnedest to make Antifa into a terrorist organization. But he forgets, as well as all of his followers, that Antifa is not an organization. Antifa is a decentralized ideology that goes against hate, bigotry, and fascism. And that's entirely the point. Antifa literally goes against fascism. It's in the name itself. So in order to make a terrorist organization out of anti-fascism, you need to contradict yourself in a way. And that's fucking stupid. In order to do that, you need to literally go all authoritarian on your country. It's been over a year since William von Bronson attempted to free some ICE detention center victims and immigrants from the Tacoma, Washington ICE detention center, and she died in the attempt of doing so. Rest in power. And when I think of people like that, I don't think of terrorism. I think of a hero. Because, realistically speaking, like, that's the type of person that is doing good for humanity. Granted, this person is breaking the law, but is the law justified? Absolutely not. The law is not justified. Therefore, the law ought to be broken. And so are the people who are enforcing the law. The people who are enforcing the law ought to be resisted. Now, am I saying that I endorse the tactics used by William von Bronson? No, I don't. Because I am legally obligated to do so. Because let's put it this way, Donald Trump has made enemies out of the everyday people and clearly decided to side with the settler colonial system and the capitalist system. So let's observe this. Why is Donald Trump a clear enemy of Antifa? Antifa has been a primary focus of Donald Trump. Recently, especially very recently. Well, that's because Donald Trump is an enemy of Antifa itself. Antifa's primary focus is on Donald Trump. Now let's take a look at fascism, just a basic definition. Fascism is a form of far-right authoritarian ultranationalism characterized by a dictatorial power, forcible suppression of opposition, as well as a strong regimentation of society and the economy, which came to prominence in early 20th century Europe. Let's say America's always been a fascist country, but we're becoming more fascist in a sense today, in the flesh, unmasked fascism. So, powerful and continuing nationalism, right? Both presidential candidates, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, are relying strongly on nationalism to make their case in the Oval Office. The Trump nationalism, make America great again, keep America great, is much more strongly obvious, but Biden's emphasis on fighting for the soul of the nation and the appeals to the voters want to restore the sense of American exceptionalism lost under Trump. And that's just one of many things that Joe Biden is no better than in Trump. Is that Biden is a nationalist and he appeals to nationalism. Another form of fascism is a disdain for human rights. There are ICE detention centers and ICE detention concentration camps at the U.S.-Mexico border where many have died of awful conditions, are going missing, or have been separated from their families. The United States have destabilized several dozen countries in the Middle East and Latin America, and millions are homeless without health care in the United States. And despite being the richest country in the world, President Trump has proposed numerous transphobic pieces of legislation, especially in the medical industry. Another form of fascism is identification of enemies as unifying causes. So, for example, the Cold War and the War on Terror were the most prominent examples of common enemies throughout tactics of public opinion. In recent weeks, however, Donald Trump and the GOP have used Antifa, which isn't even a real organization, as I said earlier, but as a scapegoat to, disperse protests and riots and uprisings, despite the FBI's documents showing that there is zero evidence found that Antifa were involved in the George Floyd protests. Alright, here's a big one right here. Supremacy of the military. Not only is there like a huge mass amount of funding contrary to what Americans need, but our military is being used primarily by politicians to install and maintain corporate-friendly governments in third world countries. So rampant sexism, right? Donald Trump has several rape allegations and has been caught on tape saying that he has grabbed women by the pussy to get them to sleep with him. Joe Biden, on the other hand, has several rape allegations of inappropriate behavior, as well as extreme credible rape accusations by Tara Reade. Controlled mass media, right? So, 90% of the media in America is controlled by 5 or 6 corporations. And as we talked about, in a previous video, the media monopoly, written by Ben Bajikian, has, stated that the number of media sources has been getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And what you have to understand is that those media sources control what you see and who you hear from. And every time a guest comes on TV, they only are allowed to talk about certain subjects. And, for example, if you hear from Noam Chomsky, he is only allowed to talk about certain subjects. And if he talks about a certain subject in a certain way, he could be arrested because of a certain contract he has to sign. These corporations also censor smaller and dissent public voices. I also want to emphasize that Donald Trump has a large control of the media himself, such as whether or not he asked people whether or not Mount Rushmore was a white supremacist symbol, whether or not people approved of socialism. You know what he's doing? He's asking people to fill those out so that way he could put people on a list. He's asking people to do so he can put people on a list, and so that way he can dox people for putting on Black Lives Matter t-shirts and Black Lives Matter posts on social media, and supporting indigenous rights on social media, and for showing up to protest with Black Lives Matter t-shirts and showing up to indigenous rights protests, and he's trying to dox people. So you need to be vigilant of that, and that's why it's important to mask up when you go to these protests. And I mean, granted, you need to be wearing a fucking mask to begin with because, you don't want to get fucking sick, do you? You fucking Karen. Alright, so there is a problem in this country with the government, and that is the obsession with national security, right? There's a song that I've written called The Terrorists Have Won, and it's a pretty controversial song, but let me explain why I wrote that song, right? After 9/11, the government passed the Patriot Act, and now our government, through the NSA and FBI, have completely stripped Americans from their privacy by monitoring cell phones, messages, and emails. In fact, immediately following the first wave of George Floyd protests, our overwhelming bipartisan majority voted to give Donald Trump increased surveillance powers. Something that had been done before, but there has been credible reports of spying planes monitoring peaceful protesters. I mean, if you look today in Black Lives Matter movements and Black Lives Matter protests, like, you literally have snipers out there. Like, fucking snipers. Not only from government surveillance, but also from Proud Boys and 3%ers. The problem with our government, especially since it's so fascist, is that religion and government are intertwined. Forget about the fact that it's big or small. It's intertwined with religion and government itself. You know, the Trump's Bible photo op was probably the most outrageous fucking example of this. Not only is it hard to find this, you know, in God we trust, it remains to be the United States motto. One nation under God remains in the Pledge of Allegiance. God bless America is literally another one of Trump's favorite. And of course, I've talked about this many times on my channel. The corporate power has always been protected by the government, and labor power has always been suppressed. Of course, like throughout the history in every fascist regime, it's always been that way. So this is an example of this in the United States as well. We combine these two, and they're both intrinsic to a capitalist economy and need to be stymied in order to succeed. Corporate power is protected by the state, and that's because the state is a capitalist class in itself, and it uses lobbying corporate power and corporate media as a means of campaign donations to ensure politicians serve their interests and not the people, the working class. So when the labor unions want to make a demand, then unfortunately the labor unions don't get their voices heard, and they are usually crushed in the end. And that's why the police serve the corporate power. Because if you look at the history of the police and the way the police function today, they are there to serve and to protect the means of property and the means of the capitalist class and the corporate power. We're gonna get into some really, really dark shit here. In Nazi Germany, it was a point where they censored art, and they absolutely had a, you know, they literally like had a point where, you know, if something was made by a Jew, or if someone was made by an African, or if someone was made by someone that was not white, that would be considered degenerate art, and they would make museums only for that, and they would burn art for only people that were, like, you know, outcasted or degenerate. And here in the United States, public schools and colleges across the country have cut arts and humanities programs at an alarming rate in the United States. Another thing that's really interesting here in the United States is that there is an obsession with crime and punishment. Despite, you know, only making 4% of the global population, the United States accounts for 20% of the world's prison population, which the United States has the most of people in prison per capita in the United States, in the entire world, and that's more than China. So why do we have fascism in this country? If the working class is not aware that there is flaws of capitalism and the actions of the bourgeoisie has to force them into a poor materialist state, then they will often misdirect their hatred, which is why a lot of fascist states scapegoated specific groups of people. It's evidence that many of the 20th century fascist states in Europe have done this. Benito Mussolini and the brown shirts fucking did this shit. Adolf Hitler and, you know, the fucking SS soldiers fucking did this. Fucking Franco and his fucking soldiers did this. Like, they fucking all did this shit. And now we're seeing today with Donald Trump and ICE and the Proud Boys and the Traditionalist Workers' Party and the 3%ers and the Blue Lives Matter movement and the Confederates. You know, you got all them. So is America a fascist nation? I'll let you decide.